So I received a comment recently asking me to look into the rapidly increasing money supply starting in the beginning of November. I looked into it, and I think there's something interesting going on here, but I don't think it's a sign of impending rapid inflation. I'll get to why in a moment. Here you can see a chart of the M1 money supply and the physical component of it, which is currency in circulation. Currency in circulation, as you all know, is my primary interest because the Treasury has stated explicitly that it considers the physical notes printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to be the senior liens against the Treasury-held gold. And while the rate of creation of the physical notes has picked up pace in 2020, it didn't match what has been happening to M1. We can see that starting early this year, M1 really started to take off. It rose suddenly from $4 trillion to $5 trillion. Then the pace of the increase slowed somewhat, increasing the M1 money supply by about $600 billion over the course of several months. Then for some reason, M1 started skyrocketing again, increasing by $700 billion over only a month and a half. Now we have to ask ourselves, why? I did some digging, and to keep this presentation reasonably short, I will just state that the Federal Reserve has not substantially increased its balance sheet in November and December. If you Google Fed total liabilities, you can graph the Fed balance sheet for yourself and see that while it skyrocketed in March and April, it has only modestly increased since that time. So if the Federal Reserve is not responsible for this increase in the M1 money supply, what can explain it? Well, it comes down to the definition of M1. M1 is narrow money, which consists of physical notes and coin in circulation, plus checking accounts, otherwise known as demand deposits, and traveler's checks. So let's add demand deposits to this chart and see what it tells us. And here it is. Demand deposits are up $700 billion. M1 is up $700 billion. So if this addition to aggregate demand deposit accounts didn't come from the Federal Reserve monetization efforts, where did it come from? And this is the crux of the matter. I spent most of the day scratching my head trying to figure it out. Then it hit me. I decided to look at the M2 money supply. Let's add it to the chart and see what it tells us. What we can see when we add M2 to the chart is that although it has been gradually trending up for the past 6 months or so, following its rapid rise in the March to April timeframe, it has not spiked in November and early December like M1 did. To appreciate what that means, let me pull up a chart courtesy of Wikipedia that shows the definition of the different monetary measures. The various monetary definitions are shown in this chart. We have M0, which is the narrowest. It is simply the physical notes and coin in circulation. M1, as we can see, is just M0 plus a few extra components, as I mentioned earlier. These are traveler's checks, demand deposits, and other checkable deposits. These things are essentially money that is available on demand at a moment's notice. It is instant liquidity. M2 is M1 plus a couple of different additional account types. These are savings deposits, time deposits such as CDs of less than $100,000, and money market accounts. Why is the distinction important? Well, we'll talk about what makes savings accounts different from a checking account in a moment. For now, just know that if M1 spiked, but M2 did not, it means that one or more components of M2 declined to offset the increase in M1. So my theory, which I tested, was that money moved out of savings and time deposit accounts and into demand deposit accounts. There must have been a sudden shift in liquidity preferences that caused $700 billion to move down the liquidity pyramid. Sure enough, that's what happened. Let me show you. Due to scaling, it's a little bit difficult to see here the one-for-one match, but you can see the sudden drop in savings deposits, which were then recategorized as demand deposits. We have to ask ourselves the question, why? This is a large and sudden shift. It certainly is not the coordinated action of millions of small depositors who all of a sudden decided, hey, I think I'll close my savings account and move it all to checking. I don't think most people even consider such things. Quite the opposite, in fact. I hear a lot from investing websites on the internet about high-yield savings accounts. Lots of people I know utilize online high-yield savings accounts to eke out an additional 0.5% interest per year. So it seems to me that most of the ordinary people out there probably seek to maximize interest, provided they think that the FDIC will keep them whole in the event of a bank failure. No, I think this sudden large decline is more likely to be big moneyed interests who know that something is coming, some kind of a new regulation. Let's read through one of the Fed's write-ups on Regulation D concerning savings accounts. You can pause this video at any time if you want to read the full text, or you can look up Regulation D yourself. Let me just highlight what I think are the most important parts. And these are things that I wasn't aware of, though I am now. It says, the two most significant features of savings deposits are the reservation of right requirement and the restrictions on the number of convenient transfers or withdrawals that may be made per month or per statement cycle of at least 4 weeks from the account. In order to classify an account as a savings deposit, the institution must, in its account agreement with the customer, reserve the right at any time to require 7 days advance written notice of an intended withdrawal. In practice, this right is never exercised, but the institution must nevertheless reserve the right in the account agreement. In addition, for an account to be classified as a savings deposit, the depositor may make no more than 6 convenient transfers or withdrawals per month from the account. So this is quite interesting. There is a regulation on the books that says that depository institutions have the right to require 7 days of written notice in order to access funds. It also places a 6-transaction limit on what is termed a convenient transfer, and convenient is given a definition. Now, this all seems very innocent, but what if it's not? Surely someone, or some people, care enough to move $700 billion worth of assets out of this type of deposit classification. What do they know? Is the regulation about to be changed to severely limit access to savings deposits and money markets? You can see here that money market accounts are included. Now, I'm personally very curious about this. Given that interest rates are pretty modest right now on savings accounts, I'm going to be taking some action personally myself. I'd rather do what the big money is doing and be out 0.6% interest than risk not having access to my funds. This trend of the move from time deposit to demand deposit, which has shown no sign of stopping yet, bears watching. What I'm really curious about is the liquidity preference. If it starts showing up as a preference for physical notes, then we'll know that the move down Exter's pyramid is in full swing, and we all know what constitutes the base of Exter's pyramid. Gold. Get you some, if you haven't already.